quick. This is Emily. She is doing a documentary of what we've been going through. And she's been documenting what Never Again's been doing. She's been documenting a lot of the meetings. So thanks for letting her be here, guys. This is going to be the record of what our community's gone through. She's been working on it from the very beginning. She got funding for this. She's putting a huge amount of time into this, and many of you have been putting a lot of time into this too, so thank you. Hi, Tanya. This is our fearless leader walking in again, and Tanya. She's the one who got the ball rolling on Never Again. She's the one that made the first meeting at the Blue happen.
But I got him, so that made it work.
She's got the shirt. The shirts are cool, so if you want a shirt, we can get you a shirt. All right, so let me give you guys an idea how this is going to work today, okay? So I'm Brian Roeder, Tanya Rivera, we're co-founders of Never Again Moss Landing, all volunteer local folks, right? I see a lot of familiar faces, I see a lot of new faces, and I'm really grateful everybody's making time this morning. What we're doing today is we've asked 6 individuals, I think we have 5, from different areas of expertise, okay? They all have scientific capabilities. And the main focus is going to be a discussion after they introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they are focused on, a multidisciplinary discussion on a series of questions having to do kind of with, generally speaking, where we're headed now, right? So there are some folks here who have some ideas about some things that can be done. Now, the rules are really simple. Step 1, they're going to do introduction real quick. Step 2, they're each going to go a little bit deeper on what they're doing. Step 3 will be, I've got about 5 or 6 questions, and I'll ask them of 2 of the individuals up here each time. They'll have a bit of a discussion on that question, and then we'll open up to the rest of the panel and you guys to ask questions or to make brief observations. Okay? Hey, Greg. Good to see you. To make brief observations. So that we have time for discussion. Now, our time frame is we absolutely have to be out here by noon. Kim Solano of the Haute Enchilada has lent us this space. She's been incredibly gracious. You'll see her walking around here in making this available to us. This, if you haven't been here before, this is an extraordinary local place. It's kind of the heart of Moss Landing. And you should come back. She has amazing, she's doing tapas now. She was open before the fire. She closed for a couple of months. She's open again doing tapas at Light Fair. This is a gathering place for the community. It's a magical place. I just discovered it since the fire myself. She also has an art gallery here. So it's a really wonderful, unique place, and I'm glad you're here today. Another person I want to introduce real quick before we get started is Matt McFaul. These are Matt's photographs over here. They are for sale. Matt has done some amazing, beautiful photography since well before the fire, but since in particular. When you go to neveragainmosslanding.org, our website, when you see photos of creatures, that's all Matt. And he's made them available to us, so we have those to be able to populate that site. When we have an article or we have a scientific paper without a photograph, we can use his photographs to kind of anchor those papers that are there. If you haven't been to the website, neveragainmosslanding.org, once you go there, there's a resources page which we continue to populate. There's some news articles that are a little bit stale, but we got more we'll be putting up. So there's a lot of information there. You can also let us know your contact information if you wish, so that you can get into our email list. Hey ladies, come on in. Welcome. All right, any critical questions before we get started? Okay, so what I'd like to do is introduce our panel here. They're going to self-introduce because I've been so busy moving.
Sure, I'm Dustin Mulvaney. I'm a professor in environmental studies at San Jose State University.
Hey Dustin.
I'm Michael Polkabla. I'm a certified industrial hygienist. What that means is I'm a hazmat expert, and I'm locally, and I was involved early on in the project and working with this great group of people.
My name is Maya Elson. I have a lot of different affiliations right now. I work with a nonprofit called Co-Renewal that does post-fire bioremediation research. I am a guest instructor at UCSC where I engage students in post-fire and fire and fungi work, and some of our amazing students are here today. And then I'm also a graduate student in environmental studies at SJSU, where Dustin teaches.
Yeah. I'm Skylar. Skylar Sakulis. I'm an environmental justice organizer from Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice. We're an environmental justice nonprofit based in San Francisco, but we work with communities across California, Arizona, Utah. I live in Santa Cruz, so I'm coming up from Santa Cruz today. Hello everyone, my name is Liv Giacomo. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a mycologist, ecologist. I love making maps, so the maps in front of you are made by me. I am an ecologist at the Natural History Museum in Santa Cruz, and I also am a graduate student at San Jose State University.
So these folks have come on their own time to have this interdisciplinary discussion. And we'll see what comes out of it, okay? We don't have anybody from the government here. We don't have anybody from Vista here. They're really not engaging. I will say that Glenn Church has been fantastic. He continues to fight for our community. He's up against really long odds in a variety of ways. The state is not coming. They're not here. They're not going to be here. The resources they can bring are not coming. The feds are not coming. It is us, folks. And, you know, we have good few people in our community who are trying to help in our local government. A lot of them live out in this area, but they're limited in what they can accomplish. The county doesn't keep a toxicologist on staff, for example. So I will say this, Never Again Moss Landing has heard from a lot of people from around the world. And these folks, you know, Dustin's been to several events and documenting them, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about that. Skylar's organization, she's going to tell you about, starting to try and help us. I will say that last week we did have a gentleman flying from Boston to take sampling for dioxins, things like not PCBs, but
PFAS.
yeah, PCBs, yes, and so these really toxic things that are out there in the environment. So they've done testing, and we'll get results from that. So that'll, you know, we did the metals before, we'll do that. So folks are starting to come to help.
One more thing, next weekend, when he was talking about Scott that came to do the testing for the dioxins, we're having another gathering at the Grange on Sunday.
Yes.
Is at 1 o'clock. Please come join that. They're going to have some of the results from the dioxin
We
testing.
hope, yes.
And
Fast tracking it.
yes, and it's, we have other people coming. We have a woman that is the biggest pit bull in the world from East Palestine.
The trained
Coming.
element. Yep, she's flying out to do this.
Yes, and it's, please come.
We're going to have Beatrice Scolum, who's one of the top toxicologists on these industrial disasters. Probably, I think we're hoping calling in, zooming in. So that is going to be different. It's going to be 3 panels, local panel, scientific panel, and then panel of people from outside the area talking about what has happened elsewhere, which in many ways looks a lot like what's been happening here in terms of the government response. Okay? Michael, why don't we start with you if we can, because you were there from the beginning. So Michael, he's getting set up. BioMax Environmental out of Pacific Grove. Michael called me up on the Thursday, 1 week after the fire, and said, what can I do to help? And I said, what came out of this plant fire? And how do we find out? He said we could do surface wipes. So it's Michael's expertise that made the citizen sampling possible. And he did it the right way because he knew how to do it the right way. Between him and another individual who had testing kits that she took initiative to get, and then our communication lines that we had, we put all that together in about 32 hours, I think it was, from start to finish. And you guys, you filled them out. So Michael, you have the floor.
Okay, my name is Michael Polkabla. I'm a certified industrial hygienist with BioMax Environmental, a consulting firm, and I specialize in hazardous materials. I got involved with this, day one. Day one was, we're all watching the news, right? And we see that there's a big fire, and I'm watching it on KCBS, and I'm thinking, lithium battery fire. Okay, this is kind of exciting. My wife and I drove down to the beach. I live in Pacific Grove. We drove down to the ocean front of the beach, and it was early evening, and we could see across the bay just this magnificent fire, and I'm thinking, that is not a little fire. That's big. And knowing what I know, my background's biochemistry, molecular biology, and aquatic biology. Okay, And so it kind of combines the hardcore science with the environmental aspects of it. So I'm looking at this from okay, these are some chemicals that are getting released. Hydrofluoric acid, HF. And then all the other, like we know, in any type of a plume, in a fire, that smoke itself is a combination of dozens, if not even more, compounds that are being combusted, and they change from the original form when they get superheated, and they get emitted into the air. So they change, and sometimes they change to create more toxic materials, okay, like the hydrofluoric acid that could be released, and also the metals that are degrading. And this fire, as we all know, burned for days. A couple of days, and this was not just a small fire, this was putting up a plume, and we could see, all of us, when we could view that, the plume going straight up, because we were very lucky that day. We had no surface wind, okay? It went straight up, and then it dispersed after it reached a certain level. So it dispersed out. And so what the issue there was that plume, what goes up, contains many things: aerosols, particles, particulates, gases, vapors, all the different, the formulations of those superheated materials that then cool, and then they condense, and if they have density, they will settle out. So, I'm watching the news. It's like, okay, I understand from a chemistry standpoint, this is a big deal. Okay, and so I'm watching the news, and I'm seeing, Dan Green on the news, talking about the fire, and then he has his guy Felix, who's standing in front of the place with a N95, at first not even an N95 respirator. And he's looking as nervous as you can ever imagine, right? As he should. And then the fire trucks are leaving behind him. And he's, doing this thing. Look, why are they leaving? Well, they're doing what fire people will do in a case when the fire is out of control and they can't control it. They need to back off and set up a perimeter.
And Michael, time checking, about 3 minutes left.
Okay, got it. So I got involved, from the get-go with these folks, and what we did was this: talking with Brian. Okay, he said, I introduced myself to him, and he said, what do we need to do? And I said, well, we need to, get the EPA involved, get the local county involved. And as we saw, they were late and they weren't doing things that they should have been doing. And I said, he said, what does this mean? I go, well, we need to know what's in that plume, okay? And not only what is in that plume, if you're breathing it, if you smell it, and if you're involved with this, you're too close, because we don't know what it is, because no one's telling us what it is. We just know from the chemistry standpoint what it could have in it. And then I said, okay, then the next step after that is that what is in that plume and what is settled. That was the big point that was missing. So what we did, we organized. Brian was great, and Angie was great. They organized, put out the word, we need people to collect samples. So we collected samples in the community. And these are 125 people who were trained at a number of locations in Prudale as well as Capitola. We showed them a YouTube video, myself, how to collect surface samples. We gave them kits, and they went out and they dispersed and they grabbed. And how many here actually did some of that sampling?
Matt, I think it's 7.
Thank you, thank you. So as you know, we trained you to do it right, because that's the information that we can trust. And that is the information of telling us what settled on surfaces. We have that information. And bottom line, we have 125 samples. We geolocated them. And each of these little dots on here, each of the dots represent the different colors are going to be for manganese, cobalt, lithium, and nickel. Okay? So we're able to profile that. What we saw, and this is distance from the site, what we saw that there's a correlation as you came right at the site, because it was going straight up, not having super high levels. But as you get a couple miles away, a few miles away, we're seeing that's where it's settling out, that's what we'd expect. That's what the plume models exactly correlated with and showed us. So this particular graph, it comes later on after we wanted to know, well, what do those numbers mean? And I'll just hold this up. What we did, I consulted with a number of toxicologists, and we determined what a clearance level would be. So what is high, what is low, and so we've established criteria by which we would be able to make these calculations. These are the numbers that we based, and what that chart showed was that it correlated with the elevated levels were also in that plume area, which was close to the site, just far enough away so that the plume had a chance to settle out.
I know I can, Michael. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to get that to you guys. So if you, that'll be at the website. It'll go out in an email. It's just been, with everything going on, we haven't been able to get a final version of that out. But Michael's done a huge amount of work to show the correlation, which is the thing that's been missing. We know the numbers are elevated. What does it mean? Michael's been working really hard on his own time to try and help us with that.
So the bottom line was that samples with the greatest level of concentrations were within that plume area where it settled out. Okay? And a lot of people ask this question, which is a good question. What's normal background? Well, it depends on who you ask. You know, there's a lot of data throughout California as to what a normal background level of cobalt is and so forth. But the beauty of what we did by collecting 125 plus samples now is we established what the background was within our data. Because you see, as we get farther away from the site, it would be more reasonable to assume that that was less impacted. Like the samples that were collected in Carmel, or the samples collected in San Jose, far enough away, that's going to represent what normal background really is. So within our data, we're able to answer that question without really diving into that argument that technical people will say, well, this could be normal background.
Wind up time, my friend.
No. Wind up time is this. So what we're able to establish, which is critical, is that within the plume, there were elevated levels of these 4 heavy metals. That's irrefutable. And we were able to demonstrate that, irrespective of all the different arguments that could be made about what's normal background and so forth. No, pull this out. By contrast, the local health department, they collected 8 samples. We collected 125. So congratulations, good job.
Thank you, Michael. All right, Dustin, why don't we hear from a little bit about what you've been up to?
Sure. Hi, my name is Dustin Mulvaney. I'm a professor at San Jose State University in the Environmental Studies Department. And so my background is a little bit interdisciplinary. I have a background in chemical engineering and applied physics. I have a master's in environmental policy and a PhD in environmental studies, which I would say has got a more social science component. So I feel like I'm a mutt. I'm an academic mutt. So we'll start with that. Back in 2020, we had applied for a couple of federal research grants, the National Science Foundation and the Environmental Protection Agency. And our framing for this project was to understand energy transitions in areas that were going through development for battery resources. So lithium like towns that were, or communities that were experiencing lithium mining or lithium extraction. So we have case study in Thacker Pass in Nevada, the Salton Sea in Imperial County. We've got case studies of manufacturing facilities. So we're literally following lithium through the life cycle as it was extracted from Earth and taken and put into the batteries. So we had case studies along each site. We proposed that research in 2020. The first booster had just been turned on. First battery system had been turned on, but there had been no fires yet. So when we took, and we have recycling case studies, so we have the whole gamut. So literally a cradle-to-cradle examination of life cycle. And what we were interested in is understanding how fence line communities were changing or responding to this. So when we picked the Moss Landing site as our battery energy storage case study, the presumption was this was a good news story because you're retiring a dirty gas power plant and replacing it with clean energy. So we were thinking that this would be the one life cycle stage where like the impacts to the fence line communities maybe would be reduced compared to a site that now has mining or lithium extraction or now a recycling facility in it. So that was why we picked. Now, when we got the grant finally funded after a couple of cycles of reapplying, there had already been a fire. So we started to understand that maybe there's a fire risk here with the batteries. So we actually wrote a paper back last winter that followed. So with that same framework, what are the impacts to water across the life cycle? So at Thacker Pass, at manufacturing, at the battery storage site, at recycling, what are the impacts to water? And there's a line in there that says, battery fires could impact water systems. And I felt like even having that in the paper at the time, even though there were a couple fires at Moss Landing, was a little bit exaggerating the point. And like, oh, the editors of the journal might be like, are you embellishing that point about fires from batteries potentially impacting aquatic ecosystems? And then a month later, after the publication, maybe it's 2 months or 3 months later, we have the big battery fire here. I'm sitting there at home getting, I've got a 3-year-old and 5-year-old, so I'm like making dinner, and it was my night to make dinner, and my wife, turns the TV on, and I see battery fire, and I'm like, oh gosh, my case study is on fire. I got to go out there. And I was like, can you please cook dinner tonight? And I got to go drive out to Westcliff and see if I can see that thing. Wow, I could really see that thing. So I was like, I got to get closer. So I went all the way, pretty close to the fire, just as far as I could get to Bennett Slough up here. Anyhow, so it became pretty clear. So when the first fires had happened, the case study had shifted to being one about not necessarily a good news story for the fence line community, but like how did the state step in and react to the battery fires with Laird's first emergency response legislation? Because that was the next good story, right? Well, we had battery fire, we learned from the risks, then we passed this emergency response legislation. Okay, that's a good news story still. We're on a battery fire learning curve, and we're learning here. But it was pretty clear immediately after that emergency response legislation really didn't do much to help the communities in response to fires, both from the emergency responders perspective as well as the community response. I mean, just looking at this plume data, if you were to overlay where they evacuated to where the plume landed, those are different spatial locations, and that's important information for emergency responders to be thinking about. Like, how do you communicate to a community when there's, I'm thinking of like the trampoline that's covered in this kind of fine layer of nickel, manganese, cobalt. I got a 3 and 5-year-old, and I'm like, I wouldn't want on that. Meanwhile, they're digging, big scoops of dirt and saying, the solution to pollution is dilution in some ways there, right? We're hiding stuff. So anyhow, all to say that, we're, first of all, both in the last month, our NSF and EPA funding was cut by the Trump administration, so we're no longer supported by this research. So maybe I'll set up a GoFundMe for that at some point.
Rolling, man.
But so obviously, community has concerns that have not been addressed here. The expectations for the resources that might be brought to bear from the state, from the federal government, have not really showed up. So, and there are impacts. One of the reasons that we were, I was quoted in the media a lot in the early days is because I kind of had a sense for what was in that smoke, because we were studying recycling of batteries, and we knew that they had an issue with PFAS and dealing with some of what they call black bass in that recycling phase. So I knew that there was issues with battery fires. We knew that there's PFAS in there. We knew the heavy metals. I'd already done work on different battery chemistries and things like that, so I knew that there are different potential metals in there. And this one, obviously, all over the community now. So what we're doing right now is we're trying to wrap up what we had funded to do research on. So we have this water paper that we have out already. We have fire paper. We're tracing across the whole life cycle, from mining all the way through manufacturing and recycling, the fire issues, because they're present throughout the life cycle. We're working on, and this should have been done already, but we haven't finished it, but an FAQ, because we get lots of questions, that kind of reflects what we've learned communicating and interviewing folks in the community. And that is also like a policy memo with recommendations around things like designing and regulating batteries to the highest standards. I mean, we thought we were doing that, but we don't necessarily, that hasn't fully been implemented. Increasing inspections for not just the batteries themselves, but the fire suppression equipment. We've seen studies that suggest that when they do, they check on these things, a large portion of them actually are not up to, standards of things fail, suppression equipment fails. Improving the emergency response and community notifications, not just for like air quality, but like where did the metals land? Like that should be something that I'm thinking like the farm workers that were out there the next morning out in the fields, right? Like, is there any? And that's a broader question, because I feel like there's wildfire issue there too. Like, why do we put our farm workers out in that issue? Ensuring ongoing monitoring and data transparency, that's really important. I feel like that's, if battery developers want to say that batteries are safe, this is the case study. And then the last one is working through the community throughout the whole development process, or in this case, the redevelopment process, with community right to know principles and staying engaged with the community. So So we'll be thinking about these things still. We'll continue to do work. I think we have a little bit of support to continue to do work in Moss Landing. I sense that we could, now that there's been a big fire, we'll be able to fundraise to do more work on it. And you know, we're still doing this other work on the life cycle stuff. So I'll continue to share that stuff, and I appreciate if anybody wants to talk and be interviewed for our research project too. I'm happy to you know, chat with you, and we can get you into our research protocol. So,
Dustin and I
thank you.
sat down, it was really a long, interesting conversation. If you want to share with him, he's a great listener, and he's using this stuff. So thank you, Dustin.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name's Liv. I'm a grad student, an ecologist, a mycologist. I wear a bunch of hats, also an advocate. But I made the map in front of you today. So there's two different maps. One is looking at slope. And then the other is looking at vegetation type. Both of these are very important to think about post-fire bioremediation and kind of what areas may be of specific concern. So if you have a pen or a pencil today, potentially with you, I'd love if you circled or kind of marked areas that you think are of highest concern in this specific map. We are kind of thinking about how we can mobilize ourselves, but immobilize these metals. And that would be through, well, Maya's going to talk a little bit about it, but kind of wattles that are inoculated with fungi that will immobilize their
What's a wattle? I'm sorry.
A wattle is a long straw-filled or kind of substrate-filled kind of sack. You see them on like hillsides that they prevent erosion. They're kind of like on contour. They kind of help stop water and like keep water in wherever it is. And so we would be inoculating with filamentary fungi that take up the metals, specifically aspergillus and penicillium. They are great for nickel, manganese, cobalt, lithium, everything that we're kind of most worried about. And then kind of taking that and supplementing it with, do we all know about pickleweed? A great riparian wetland plant. They are great at uptaking metals as well. They can hold up to 200,000 times the amount of metals than in their environment. And they do that through anionic, they put the metals basically anionically into their cell walls, so it's not negatively impacting them. So it's kind of a biological treatment in these areas. And so I highlighted slope in particular as these areas will have high runoff, especially in our rainy seasons. And then also the vegetation map kind of highlight the specific wetland areas, specifically agricultural land is of high concern, especially when it comes to nickel, and how that affects both our plants, our crop health, and our human health. So yeah, if you have a pen or a pencil, if you need anything, I can give you one potentially.
And you want people to give these to you once they
Yeah,
get
you can
marked?
show me after. You can also keep the map for yourself. Just let me know what you think. Yeah, we need all of your guys' minds to kind of potentially look at areas that need this the most.
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah.
And my name's Skylar. I'm here from Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice. I'm an environmental justice organizer. My focus specifically is on shoreline contamination and sea level rise, and how climate change is going to impact our shoreline contaminated sites. I focus specifically on sites in the San Francisco Bay Area, so along the San Francisco coast, the Bayview Hunters Point Naval Shipyard, Superfund site, as well as Treasure Island are both really contaminated with historical pollution. So focusing on how this type of shoreline contamination is really at risk for sea level rise and groundwater rise to flood these sites and mobilize the contamination. So some forms of remediation that California and other places use to remediate contamination are not suitable for shorelines because of sea level rise and groundwater rise. So remediations that include leaving waste in place under caps or contained is not okay because flooding will either permanently or semi-permanently inundate that site, and we can't truly protect the contamination within that from spreading or mobilizing and then going into our bay, into our oceans, and also into our waterways and our groundwater. Also, I skipped over, just in case you missed it, Green Action is an environmental justice organization based in San Francisco, but we work with communities all across California, Arizona, Utah. We've been around for almost 30 years. We're a small but mighty team. We just recently got involved. We reached out to Brian and Never Again Moss Landing to kind of uplift and support your guys' work, see what your community demands were and how we could use our resources with holding government agencies accountable and kind of uplift the demands that this community and Never Again Moss Landing has. So what we've done so far is, as other speakers have said, the California Environmental Protection Agency has not done as much as they should, if anything. So they're, an agency underneath them is the Department of Toxic Substances Control, the DTSC. And they did some initial testing in January, it seems, but not enough. Community testing is far more robust and has found more. And so because of the community findings and their lack of robust testing, we are asking for more testing, more thorough and transparent testing. The Department of Toxic Substances Control has a database online called EnviroStore that shows contaminated sites in California, and this site doesn't have a profile on EnviroStore yet. So that's something that we're asking for as well, is to have all of their testing and planning information publicly accessible and posted on this site. So we do know what they've done, what they plan to do, because right now it's not super clear. We don't know what their next steps are and how involved they're going to be. So Green Action, in partnership with Never Again Moss Landing, sent a letter to the to two top officials at the Department of Toxic Substances Control, the director and the Environmental Equity Department director, on May 9th about requesting a meeting with community members, Never Again Moss Landing, and also Green Action to kind of hold them accountable to what we're asking for. We asked that they attend a meeting. There's lots of community meetings and they're not participating or presenting their information. We heard they've received the letter, but they haven't responded to the letter. So once they have responded, we'll of course share their response, and Brian should receive it as well. We also, the Department of Toxic Substances Control also has a board of environmental safety. So this board is, I believe, 6 members whose role is to hold the department accountable for community concerns. That's their responsibility. If they do that is another thing. But they're an opportunity, they're a way for us to kind of hold them to this. So they have meetings. They're supposed to have monthly meetings, but their next one will be in July. We were able to have a couple of comments at the last one. There's opportunity for public comments, so you can comment on anything. So we were able to have a couple of comments I heard some folks here that might be here on that call as well, kind of bringing it to their attention, and then hopefully at the July meeting we'll have an opportunity to present at least 5 minutes, like a longer public comment to kind of get this on their radar. So Green Action is focusing on helping hold government agencies accountable, specifically the California Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Toxic Substances Control. But we have a long history of holding government agencies accountable and private corporations accountable. So that's where our role is in this, is helping use our resources and expertise in doing this with these agencies, making sure that they are acknowledging things like sea level rise. They're taking into account community concerns. They're doing thorough testing with community oversight, so we know what they're testing, how they're testing. Yeah, helping with engagement and transparency.
Thank you, Skylar. I just want folks to know that these folks are the cavalry. I've been talking to Glenn for the last 2 months, and I've been saying the cavalry isn't coming. I was thinking that's the state, right? That's the feds. They're not coming. I said that at the beginning. This is the cavalry, and they're not alone. There's at least 4 other organizations that have reached out that are now starting to work on our behalf. So there's some hope there that perhaps some resources which are so far been beyond our volunteer capabilities and experience are going to start coming to bear. So thank you, Skylar. You've been very proactive. Thank you all. Thank you for the environmental justice part of this and the environmental side. The next person to go here is one of the co-organizers, in particular along with Liv, of today, and that is Maya. Maya.
Hi, I'm really grateful to be here with you all, and I'm hoping that I can provide more support. I live in Santa Cruz, and I have been working on post-fire remediation since 2018 after the Camp Fire. I was very involved after the CZU with the prevention of the mobilization of toxins from burned-down structures, and then I've been doing that research at various sites up and down the West Coast. I've also I've been a part of 4 different studies at this point about post-fire recovery with fungal inoculation and microbial inoculation. And I've also been working with folks in Maui and folks in Southern California. So it was definitely been a busy time with this happening right around the same time as the fires in SoCal. So, you know, a lot of my work has been on land. I'm not a wetland expert. I haven't worked in an estuary in this capacity before, but I do think that some of the things that I've learned in the methods may be applicable, and that's what I'm really excited to engage with you all about. So just kind of to provide a really brief overview of what happens after fire. Obviously, we have soil contamination. The ash deposit can go down into the soil. You have the threats of mudslides and erosion. Not as much of an issue here because it's not as steep, but we still have that runoff that Liv was bringing up and that you can see on that map. We get soil hydrophobicity. We get...
What does that mean?
Well, I was going to go through it really quickly because
Hydrophobicity, what's that word mean?
It's not super, I'm not sure how relevant it is to here because we're dealing with an ash deposit. We're not dealing with a broadcast burn. But it's essentially when the oils from burned plants drop down and they make it so that the soil cannot absorb water in the same way. You also have a loss of the microbes that live at the surface of the soil that call in that moisture and retain that moisture. So that's part of the reason you get this ash runoff. And then of course, a lot of species are impacted by fire. Fire here in California is a natural part of our ecosystem. This kind of fire that we're dealing with is very different though. There's obviously a lot of aquatic threats with the runoff. You have metals that are contained in one place that are mobilized and can move into the food web. You can also have eutrophication, algal blooms, reduced oxygen for aquatic organisms, etc. And then of course the air is impacted as well. So bioremediation is a supplement to some of these other types of remediation that people might be doing. There are people in LA who are like literally vacuuming their yards to deal with the toxic ash. That's one way to deal with it. There's also, after an oil spill, for example, you can like suck away the contaminants. There's also, there's a lot of ways to deal with stuff, right at the beginning. If you can get in there early, you can remove some of these materials before they go out into the environment. Bioremediation is most useful once the contamination has already happened. So it's a little bit late here. My understanding is that all of this ash was at the surface, and then in February after it rained, that those contaminants kind of just sifted through, and now they're a part of the food web. So that's where I think bioremediation is most helpful. When I talk about what bioremediation is, it means just working with living organisms and living systems to help address contamination. So we have fungi that can do this, what we call microremediation, microbial remediation, which includes bacteria as well as fungi, but also nematodes, protozoa, microarthropods, etc. Phytoremediation, which is like what Liv was bringing up about the pickleweed is a plant that can pull up these metals. And then there's biochar, which is not a living organism, but it's a tool that I think could be useful here. And it can be used in conjunction with some of these other types of remediation. Biochar is wood. It's like charcoal that you create under certain conditions where you can lock in a lot of the carbon as well as create a habitat for beneficial microbes. So it goes really well with the microbial remediation and the microremediation. It also, because it has a high cation exchange capacity, that's basically a fancy way of saying that it can hold on to metals and grab onto them and bind with them. So when we're talking about contaminants, it's important to just keep in mind that we have two different classes of them. We have our organic compounds, so the PFAS, anything petroleum-based, our dioxin, our PCBs, our dioxins, furans, all of those things. And a lot of these can be broken down by the enzymes that fungi naturally create. So the way that they're digesting their food is by releasing these enzymes that can break apart the hydrocarbon molecules that make up a lot of these organic compounds. The metals are a different story. So metals can't be broken down. But they can be bound, they can be hyperaccumulated and removed, and they can be locked away where they're less bioavailable. They're going to be less of a problem for the ecosystem. And that's really where we're at with these metals in this situation at this point. I will just say that a big part of remediation is basically you're helping to create balance within an ecosystem. Just like any ecosystem, you need to have predators, you need to have prey, you need to have these different relationships, you need to have these different dynamics. When we can support microbes in having those healthy dynamics, when we have more of a complete soil food web, these organisms are more able to do their job to mitigate contamination, as well as provide healthy soil and do all sorts of great things. There's phytoremediation. So we have a cohort mate at San Jose State who couldn't be here today, named Michelle Manley, who you know, I believe, who's doing her thesis on the ability of pickleweed to be able to uptake these metals. But then there's the question of like, what do you do with all of these plants that are holding on to those metals, right? And they're halophytes, so they're very salt tolerant, right? So they already have these pathways for bringing in salt and then exuding that salt through their leaves. So they're going to be mostly, I think, exuding a lot of those metals through their leaves. So I think removing the pickleweed that's there is something to consider, and maybe replanting or reestablishing it. I know there's ecological restoration that's always happening at the slough. I wonder if like removal and replacement could be a part of the strategy. I don't know, I'm just brainstorming here. Something to think about, because these metals are in the food web, and we have to think about, where are they going to be most concentrated, and where can we be most strategic in addressing it. And working with a plant that already grows there makes a lot of sense to me. So I just wanted to show, this is what a wattle looks like, in case you're wondering. The thing in the front is a wattle, the thing in the back is a compost sock. These are what we work with to mobilize metals around burned structures. So we've had a number of different studies that have looked at ways that we can grab onto these contaminants, break down some of those organic compounds, hold on to the metals. Basically what fungi do is they create this biological filter as well as a physical filter. So that, and create habitat. What we're doing at the same time is we're creating habitat for native microbes to come in and just do their thing, or local microbes. I guess you can't say native because we never know what's actually native. And we've gone beyond just toxin mitigation, and we work on ecological regeneration post-fire, as well as carbon storage stuff. We have a machine in Pescadero. Y'all are super welcome to use it. Just come and talk to me. If you want to come make some models and you know a place to install them on this map, let's frickin' do it. I am so down, and I will so support that. We need about 4 people and at least 4 or 5 hours of time to go in, plus driving, going up to Pescadero. It's a little bit of a hike from here. But if you want to do this and you want to make some inoculated, I can get us the spawn. We need somebody to get up there a few days ahead of time and start soaking straw, but we can make this happen. We can
I'll
do
transport it.
All right, let's do it. So this work has been replicated in Maui. It's being replicated right now in Southern California. We've got one study site, we've got more coming. The testing is a major limitation. I'm going to skip through this. This is what I research is a little bit different than this. This is more of a way of dealing with the residual contamination as well as the increased fire hazard that can come in the areas around a burn structure after a fire. So if you want to bury some logs and inoculate them to prevent future fire, you can come talk to me about that.
And the wattles are
Yeah.
inoculated with aspergillus penicillium.
No, not ours so far. I think that that's a really good idea to look at the literature and see what microbes can mitigate some of these metals. But so those, I mean, aspergillus is going to just grow no matter what you do anyway. It's everywhere. It's black mold.
We got about 1 minute left.
All right. So we've got, so just sometimes I think creating the substrate, just wattles being put out in the environment, part of the reason that they're so effective is that they just create habitat for the local microbes to come and do their thing. We could inoculate with that. We could also inoculate with some of the other fungi that are a little easier to grow, that have more robust hyphal structure. So the body of a fungus is called mycelium, and this is the stuff that creates this, this web. So we like to work with that stuff because it takes up more space. It's more of a prolific myceliator. Does that make sense?
Less than a minute, Maya. I'm sorry, we got to move on.
So yeah, I think that's, we can also use high quality compost and make compost extracts. So we've got a pile up in Bonnie Doon right now where we're growing these beneficial local microbes. It's not just composting for food waste, it's composting to farm microbes, right? The beneficial microbes. So we can work with that as well. There's a lot of different options, and I'd love to continue the conversation.
Up to 3 things, just brief, 3 things you suggest folks do to protect their health. Why don't we start with you, sir? You have 3, I know this is out of the blue, you weren't prepped for it. What are 3 things that, up to 3 things, 1, 2, 3, boom, 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 that you think people could do to protect their health at this point?
In the community.
In this community, yes. The folks in this room.
Well, I think if you have kids, I'm thinking those kid toys in the yard, make sure those things are blasted.
There's
or thrown
one,
away.
good. You got any more?
No, I'll just leave it at one.
That's good. Michael, you got anything for us? 3 things?
Yeah, everybody's different in how we respond to these. So see your healthcare provider. Talk to them about what your symptoms are, your concerns are, and minimize exposure to these elevated heavy metals wherever possible. As the doctor here said, that dilution is the solution to the pollution. Well, we jokingly say that, but what's important is that some of these heavy metals are neurotoxins, some of them are carcinogens. So the less is better. So minimize your exposure.
I would say, yeah, get yourself tested for metals in your body. Everyone's body processes metals differently. I happen to have a body that doesn't do a great job, so hanging out at burned down structures is not great. I don't know why I do it, but yeah. So there's a company called Doctor's Data that I've used. It's like a P-test that you can use to test yourself for metals, and then do chelation if you need to.
By the way, on that issue,
Yeah.
at the website, we do have, under resources, information about how you can do blood, urine, or hair sampling. Right now, a lot of time has gone by. The blood almost immediately wasn't working because it moves so quickly through our body. But there's still the opportunity potentially for hair testing to give you some numbers in terms of metals that you might have inhaled and collected in your body. Okay? So that's at the website.
Definitely check out those resources. Seconding what everyone said, if you have access, get tested. Advocate for yourself in these health screenings. Trust your gut. The doctors also have to catch up with what's happening, what the symptoms might look like, how these contaminants might present themselves, short-term and long-term. So tracking your concerns. If you go to the doctor and they say that's not what this is from, you know, take note, track your concerns, trust your gut, and keep advocating for yourself.
Have you got anything for us?
Yeah, I mean, beyond what everyone else has said, I think focusing on healing our ecosystems.
Can you speak up, please?
Focusing on healing our ecosystems will heal ourselves as well.
Thank you. This question is for Skylar and Dustin. What do you think we still need to learn about this fire and its aftermath?
Right now, you have a perfect experiment to trace where metals go. So I mean, I think, you know, understanding the long-term implications for the food web issues. I mean, the thing I keep coming back to is when I learned that the Amamutsan are restoring the Olympia oysters in the slough. I'm thinking like, oh, that's where the metals might end up, and that's something I want to learn. I want to learn where these things go and what the long-term consequences are. And that's typically the thing that people will not support and will not track. And that's why it's important, I think, to emphasize it really.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Long-term concerns, both environmental and health concerns. And also, since we're still figuring out what the plume was, where it's going, and what all of the contaminants we're dealing with, we still need to understand the cumulative impact of all of these contaminants. So when we're looking at what an acceptable level of one contaminant is, we might be missing the whole picture because we're actually being exposed to dozens of contaminants. So one level of one thing coupled with all of these other contaminants is too much. So understanding the cumulative impact of all of the different types of contamination that this fire has put into the environment and into our air and water, understanding how those all interact together and how they present themselves in our bodies together.
Thank you. Did anybody else have anything here on the panel they really wanted to add to that? In particular, we've still got some more questions.
One thing really in particular, and it gets back to the name of your group, Never Again Moss Landing. I think, you know, really that sums up what we all really want. We don't want this ever to happen again. This was a terrible incident for a lot of reasons. But what's most importantly, when it's all said and done, we don't want this to happen again because of all the adverse impacts to the community, to us, to our environment.
Thank you, Michael. We actually have a couple of UCSC students here today, and I'm actually going to reach out to one of them, Savannah, back here. I have a question for you and also for, I think for Lynn, all right? So the question is, what resources would you be trying to access if you lived here in the impact zone?
The best we can do is try to gain knowledge in this situation because it's something we've been put in and we have to go through. So I would probably try to understand what metals and what toxins have been exhibited, because just knowing that there are metals and toxins is very scary, and fully understanding the implications that could have, I think is really important.
Thank you.
I think for me, I'm a visual person, so I think where I was super sparked in my interest was making these maps and continuing to kind of hone them and potentially overlaying the plume area and kind of where these metals were deposited. I think all of this is super critical information because we have such a unique ecosystem here, from the estuary to farmland to local communities to, I don't know if you saw on this farm, there's an elementary school, we have parks, we have such an important kind of area here, and I think visualizing it is super important to kind of just grasp that.
I know many of you, if not all of you, have been doing what I've been doing, and which is researching this stuff, right? Going online, Googling, ChatGPTing. I did a bit of a deeper dive from Wikipedia on dioxins, because all of a sudden I'm hearing that word. And at first, the person telling me about this was saying this is a very, 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 very bad thing, and it is. but there's so much more to it than that. So what I'd encourage people to do is when you hear something, research it, get more information, get more knowledge about it. It's kind of like a personal version of what we're doing here. We're kind of sharing different perspectives and getting different sources of information from people. But if you do that yourself and you kind of cross-reference it, you'd be amazed at how much you could be learning. I know many of you are doing that. One superstar at Never Again who's been doing this is Sharon. She has been collecting an extraordinary amount of information, much of which is at the website, much more which needs to go there. Just learning about not just the environmental aspects, but the company and the history and the county. By the way, real quick, I don't know if everybody here knows this. This Vistra installation was approved by the Planning Commission. It did not go before the Board of Supervisors. It did not go before the Coastal Commission, all right? Because it was just considered a change out of equipment. So that level of oversight was basically the staff here in Monterey, which are good people, but don't have necessarily the high level of training and sophistication of a big city, as well as the moms and pops, farmers, and small business people who are on the Planning Commission. Right? Shift it over. Emily, go ahead.
Okay, let's say I've just vacuumed my backyard and I've got a vacuum full of metals and particulates. And I'm now gonna put it where? Where am I gonna put it? Does it go to the dump? How does the dump handle it?
There are hazardous waste facilities at each dump, and you can, if you have it in a concentrated space, you can bring it there. There are also different, strategies that people have used for like urban gardening and stuff over the years. There's a sludge method where you put it in a trash bag, in a trash can, and you put a lid on it, and that's like, if you have plants that have hyperaccumulated metals, you put them in there. You just try to keep them out of the environment as much as possible.
How do the hazmat, industrial waste people, how do they handle that at, say, a dump? I mean, I'm just thinking about the end.
Yeah, often here. Dumps fill up, and often they're hazardous, and there's other disasters in other parts of the world. Like I've been working with folks in Lebanon and Palestine, and there is no way, there is no hazardous waste facility, there is no place to put this stuff. And we run out of these places after a fire really quickly. That's why like our CZU debris got shipped all the way, across the state. And LA stuff is getting shipped to Nevada, and it's like, so as much as we can manage it ourselves and figure out some way to deal with it, I think that's great. My favorite way of dealing with these metals, I will tell you, is to mine them. So there are ways that we can actually, nickel in particular, is one that there's a developed strategy. We have the technology to pull these metals out and to be able to recycle them. To me, that sounds a lot better than enslaving a bunch of children in the Congo to pull out our metals for us, for our use in all of our things that we build, right? Like most of the metals that we get, it comes from people who are enslaved. So I'd rather we be able to take it, be able to reuse them and make deal with this waste problem and make it part of this closed loop, like what you're talking about, the full life cycle. Makes a lot more sense to me if we could just make it economical.
On this issue real quick, Glenn Church has said a couple things about what's over here. First off, the pile is still there because the wall is at risk of collapsing, and it's going to take probably several more months to get it stabilized, which means that pile is open to the environment. Now it's not smoldering anymore, obviously, but it clearly did for about 7 to 8 weeks after the fire broke out. We saw the industrial smog over the Bay Area throughout the month of February and into March. It is out, it is cold, but it's open to the environment. It's not clear what that means. In regards to disposal, once they stabilize the wall, the plan, as I understand it, is that those materials will be removed not to our own dump facility because it's not rated to take those types of materials. It will go someplace else. How it's transported so it's not, emanating these particles as it goes down the road is still unknown. But all that, and EPA has taken over the overall management of remediation. This is not a Superfund site, by the way. It is on the Superfund list as a place that's being remediated, but it's not been designated the resources or the oversight of a Superfund site. There's been some confusion about that. And Tanya did a great job pinning that down. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to remove that in a way that mitigates community impacts. Whether or not that happens and how that happens, we don't know. But that's the requirements, as I understand it, of the EPA and the role it's playing, and the company as it continues to have responsibilities for the remediation, removal of this burned material. Okay?
Probably ends up in Buttonwillows or what is Clean or Petaluma City.
Okay.
Redwood Materials has recycled burn batteries from cars and things like that, so that could end up in Nevada.
And to answer your question specifically, it's a good one. You got stuff from your backyard. What do you do with it? Well, the right answer, it needs to be profiled because we don't know what's in that unless it's tested. Do we have the resources to test it? Probably not. Because it costs money, to test that. So at a bare minimum, if you have an accumulation of some material that you vacuum from your yard, you're assuming that it has some heavy metals from the fallout. Where you bring it to, you need to notify them. You should notify them that this is what I've got. Do you have a special section in your landfill that's for that? Or what do I do with it? That's a question for the actual TSD facility, the landfill, to do that. So, it's to be determined, and it depends on what it is. Absolutely, that material that's on site, ground zero, that's going to be the highest level of toxins that we can imagine. We can assume that's the case, and that needs to be profiled, and it needs to go to the correct facility.
Real quick, if you are going to be working in your yard, please wear PPE. We are getting reports of people who've been working in their yard and getting what appear to be rashes and burns type events.
And PPE means respiratory protection, dermal protection, and certainly don't ingest. So wash your hands afterwards so that when you eat, you're not ingesting what was on your hands.
Okay. A great question. Did you have a question?
Is that federal EPA that's taking over the?
Yes. Yep. The Environmental Protection Agency. However, I can't speculate about the degree to which they're engaged in this, but I will say that there are certain rules and requirements, but then again, just for the record, EPA told us all on the Monday after the fire broke out that there was no HF. And there were ground testing and the HF is lighter than air. So whether or not they knew that, I'm not going to speculate. All I can say is that clearly they were doing ground testing for something that was going straight up. They were testing for particulates, but we now know that much of this metal was vaporized, essentially turned into a fog, a mist. I haven't got a straight answer on this yet. I'm trying to get it, but it seems that probably that was not large enough to be part of the particulate matter testing. So there's a reason why the particulate matter testing the EPA did showed very low levels. If the majority of what was in the air was actually smaller than what they were testing for. So far, so good?
I have an insight on that too, if I might chime in. So the Cal EPA and the EPA protocol for testing soil is to take a core of the top 6 inches. At that point, all of the ash was still on the surface. So dilution is the solution to pollution, right? So all of their samples were heavily diluted because they weren't measuring what was on the surface. There's another scientist who couldn't be here today who was measuring what was on the surface and found alarmingly high levels of the ash on the surface.
I was at the NOAA meeting yesterday, and just to add on what you're saying about the core samples and whatnot, they are actually going to change what they're asking the state to, whatever the state makes you do, you know what I mean? Telling the state what they have to do to take the samples is going to be the core, but they don't get to dilute it. No part of it will be diluted.
Right, they're statistically biasing the
Each
results.
different, like every 2 centimeters or 3 centimeters. So that is in the works because of what happened in Los Angeles. So that's pretty huge.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that it hasn't happened already with all the other fires and all the
So-
toxic ash and like.
Big picture, what we've been seeing is that I'm sure you've been hearing this general narrative, which is there's really nothing much to worry about here. This community knows otherwise, right? We know otherwise, and the tragedy is that they're not listening to our community, okay? And that's wrong. It's that simple, that's wrong. Now, their testing has not been for the right things in the right ways at the right places. It's that simple. And because they're not generally utilizing our data, they're not looking for what it is that we found to see if it's true enough. So that's the challenge that we faced. I expected personally that the company would do everything it could to try and get out and away from responsibility for this. That's no surprise. Okay, that's strictly surprising. It wasn't to me. Where I have been surprised is how the state has failed us. That's been something I never saw coming. And in hearing from people at other industrial disaster sites, this is the playbook.
Is there a soil test that you can do, like in my backyard? You know, my wife's got garden beds and we're digging them up and planting plants, and we're like, oh, are we being stupid, or can we test this soil to see if it's...
Michael, can you answer
Is
that?
there something that's simple and easy that I can say, hey, I can...
Will's house, yeah.
It can be tested, yes.
And how do you, I mean, is it something that you...
It's quite simple. It's about a cup worth of dirt that's sent to an appropriate laboratory, and they do a CAM 17 or CAM 22 analysis. It is doable, and then you'll get a profile.
It's fairly expensive if you do it on your own dime.
It's not cheap. It's a couple $100, you know, for that sample.
I mean, we're planting a garden, and I'm like, this is stupid.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
I have my soil tested over on Strawberry, and I have 5 acres, so I took samples from 3 locations. I used a soil probe, and I used about 4 inches, and it was last month, so there have been at least 3 inches of rain since the fire. So I thought, well, I don't know. So I mixed those all up and got them back. And what I got, it was about $300 for that, and I had them test only for the 5 metals.
Good.
That was less expensive. And everything was kind of fine on that test, but then somebody pointed out to me online, well, did you have it tested for VOCs or PFAs or dioxins? And I did not, so I don't know, do those show up in a soil test?
So dioxin testing occurred this week. We have 6 samples from some of the sites that were originally tested and had very high elevated metals to show, because that's canary in the coal mine, right? It got there in big quantities. By the way, folks, if you look at the map at the website and here you see a really big number and it's a block from you, that doesn't mean you have a big number. There are eddies and the air is moving, there are blockages, there are trees. So deposition varies wildly, but there are general trends, which is part of what Michael was showing on his sheet, okay?
When anybody gets, like I have information now and I'd be happy to share it. I can hardly understand what it says, of course. You know, I'm kind of relying on their sort of summary of what California accepts. Who knows if that's a good thing, and then what my soil looked like from the samples I took, and who knows if I did it correctly, etc. But I'm just wondering if that would be helpful for anybody who does get their soil tested. We could kind of pool our data so that not everybody...
It would be helpful. It's a matter of time and resources among our volunteer group. Anybody in this room who wants to help will be welcomed with open arms.
Anybody not in this room that you know.
By the way, I want to introduce a couple of people, Nina and Greg, from Santa Cruz. They're leading the charge on the 3 BESS that are proposed in Santa Cruz. So they've made the trip here. Thank you for being here, guys. I know that you're doing a lot of work to help people understand in the Santa Cruz County area what's happened here, as well as what could happen there. By the way, these new BESSes, and we're hearing this from the authorities, are basically in containers, and they're using a new formulation. So the argument is that we've heard from the governor's office and from our state senator, who's really let us down, in my opinion. We've met with him. From these people is, and most recently a letter from Panetta's office, is that they're safer, accidents are going to happen, the tech's better now, kind of don't worry about it, right? But even the new tech can burn, and while it won't hopefully ever be in a giant building like this was, although they're trying to do one in Morro Bay, and there's still a 100 megawatt building here, just like the one that burned. So they haven't decided yet if they're going to shut that down and take it all out, or if they're going to somehow let it start.
That's Elon's, right?
No,
No.
this is Vistra 2.
No.
There's a 300 and a 100. The 300 burned, and the 100 is still there, just sitting there, the exact same type of configuration. But the point is that these new batteries, these new configurations, they can still burn. They're much more stable, but they can burn, and if they do, they're more toxic. And the point is, and again, Nina and Greg know more about this probably than I do, but the point is that it will mess up your neighborhood. And they're approving hundreds of these a year to go in, or they're just being installed. And so, while hopefully we never have a gigantic thing go up like we did here, which happened to be us, a local one across from Aptos High, if it pops, it's going to mess up my parents' neighborhood, right, where I grew up. So this is still very much an issue, even though you're hearing, first off, we're not finding anything, and secondly, the new stuff is safe. Those two things don't seem to actually reconcile, because these new ones are also burning. Okay?
I have a question for you, Dustin. So your work is kind of squarely pointed at the crossroads between the science behind these emerging renewable technologies and public policy. And so far what I've been able to sort of glean from conversations with academics in research is that they don't get involved in public policy conversations. So, so my question is, well, I have a very direct question for help with, are you aware of any engineer focused on battery technology who would be willing to participate in a panel like this?
I can help track one down.
Or a couple, because
Yeah,
we are
yeah.
sorely in need of that in Santa Cruz County.
Yep, we can work with that.
And also, so you just said that, you know, part of your closed loop advocacy is exploring higher battery standards
Yep.
and higher suppression standards. But we know that lithium is flammable and explosive by nature, science, and it's not really suppressible. And if you use foam to suppress it, that's also toxic.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, you were working with a partner up in Portland, her funding was also cut, and I'm sorry, I can't remember her name.
Yeah.
At the very end of an article that was published about this recently, she was quoted as saying that one of her conclusions that she's come to, early conclusions from her research, is that she finds that people can be very much in support of green change and the green movement and a carbon neutral grid, and yet be opposed to these facilities, but there's no further comment from her. So the point is, the reason why people are opposed to this is because it's dirty. And so is it okay to say this is an emerging green technology and it's okay for us to have a smattering of small fires around agricultural land all over the United States? I mean, how is that okay? And at what point is the academic world going to stand up and speak like to public policy? Because the state's public policy right now is being driven by this rush model, race model to get to 2045. That's their public policy.
Yeah.
And a stranglehold from the lithium industry. That's the public policy. So where does your research weigh in on that? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I've testified before Congress 3 times in the last couple of years on critical minerals recycling policies. I work on for an EJ group on lithium in Lithium Valley for the Blue Ribbon Commission there, making sure that community isn't negatively impacted from lithium extraction. So I feel like I have been pretty active on public policy. I'm regularly on phone calls with our Monterey County Board of Supervisors, not even my county. Santa Cruz Board of Supervisors have reached out to me. John Laird's office has reached out to me. So I'm doing my best out there, and I can't control what reporters report and what quotes they decide to put into their articles.
The problem is all I'm seeing as a former builder for the union is poor planning. Why would you want to put another nuclear power plant where there's a fault line and yada yada yada? We have less seismic areas in California that can serve our purposes. when these things fail, they are, like you said, very dirty and they're gonna destroy us. And because of that lack of poor planning, we're having to pay the price for somebody who's, probably got promoted for the idea. So, the green idea aspect of this is because it's there, it's an eyesore, let's do something with it, right? But it bit us in the butt because we didn't know the science of what it does. And what I'm seeing here is, with the panel is like, you're a specialist in fires on the lithosphere, but what we need is remediation in a fluvial system. We need to take that turbidity that's coming through and feed it into the brackish water. And the only thing I can think of from community college is like they do these like plastic poles where the water hits it and it knocks all the turbidity down. And maybe we can use that to knock those heavy metals down as they feed into the brackish and then test that sand soils where those waters feed into the moss-living brackish. Would something like that be plausible?
It depends on what type of soil or sand and silt you're working with. Clay in particular is known to like hold on to the metals more. And so it would be kind of a, like, I know we don't have the time, but it would be kind of a
Clay's lighter
test.
is the lightest, I understand.
Yeah, test and kind of see what is the best option. And that's kind of why we're here today too, is kind of get these ideas, see what people think is the best option, and kind of workshop it all and kind of mobilize it in whatever way we can.
What I want to say behind all this are expenses, right? And that is a challenge. So it's easy for us, and it's very valid for us to say, could we do this, could we do that? Many of these things are thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. That's why the Calvary is so important, because they can bring resources, maybe some of them financial, knowledge, right? The ability to reach out to our elected officials in a way that's effective, as opposed to more haphazard. There are two toxicologists at UC Davis that I've spoken to. We're trying to put together a grant proposal that would allow them to test the livestock, because there's still remedial elements there, and people's pets in the neighborhood, and then take that and extrapolate and statistically carry forward the increased probability of cancers in the human population. They can do that tomorrow, but they don't have the money, right? They've got to go back, like several of these guys know, they got to go back and find money from generally a federal agency. And so I've been asking them for a grant proposal, or at least a proposal what it'll cost, and then I hope to get that in the next week or two, and if I get it, maybe I can go out and find some money so they don't have to go through a grant proposal, provided it can do what it is that they've indicated it can do. So these things are there, but somebody's got to pay for them. The gentleman who came out and did the dioxin testing this week flew out on his own dime from Boston. He's paying for the testing. It's $650 a test. We provided him with the locations, and Sharon, who's not here, I don't think, was able to guide them where to go and put the time in. So that's the kind of things that are out there, but just finding the money or finding the person who'll say, I'll pay for it myself, is really a challenge.
Here, I talked with my veterinarian who lives in Prunedale. He said right after the fire he saw a very high and unusually high level of ruminants that aborted their fetuses, and he talked about a possible study with UC Davis. So I encourage people to report any of that to their veterinarians, to Never Again Moss Landing, to build support to document this issue. My second question is, you mentioned the pickleweed absorbs the heavy metals. Has there been any testing of the pickleweed for the levels of these high metal levels, heavy metals?
No. However, if anybody here has an in with the Elkhorn Slough Foundation people, they might be able to give us access for that. And then we could go to work on seeing if there's a way. Part of the reason why the students are here, by the way, they're all graduating or going off to the next thing in life, but part of the idea, which Maya and Liv have really been focused on, is trying to maybe start a cadre of kids who can get engaged in this as a project. It's kind of a pipe dream, but it may be possible. So you got to start somewhere. We're planting seeds literally today, perhaps.
You know, I mean, these corporations have marketers and they call them scientists, whether they paid for whatever documentation to say that or whatever. Again, they've studied psychology, they're marketers, they know that people will always lean towards whoever tells them what they want to hear, as the recent elections proved. Moving forward, you know, we were tricked into thinking this was green, and technically it is as long as it doesn't burn. Right. You know, but moving forward, we already have newer technology like these salt batteries. Have you looked into that to see, are they creating a narrative for that as well? Is this just all more BS information? Yeah, it's safe, nothing can happen.
Yeah, that's for me. Yeah, so in the policy brief that we're developing, that's one of the areas that we have is like, what are people in research labs looking at that are the future battery technologies?
Third generation batteries.
Yeah, the sodium batteries, you know, I've a couple colleagues who study sodium batteries one's at UC Santa Barbara. I said, are they safe for fire? No. She says, they catch on fire in the lab all the time. Yeah. So that's not, but, you know, out there, you know, a lithium battery, what's flammable is the electrolyte.
Correct.
And if there are, you know, research papers on non-flammable electrolytes, those batteries are not near commercial yet, but they're out there. There are self-extinguishing batteries that when they catch on fire, they actually create a fire suppressant and put the rest of the battery out. So these are things that, and why it's important to advocate for these things, because, you know, someone's in a research lab thinking about this, they don't have unlimited budget, but we need to be, you know, investing in those future technologies. Like, at some point, we won't have batteries catching on fire.
Or there's
Also-
new
but we have them now, so.
technology that can't melt down.
Also, I'll be interviewing folks from a startup that 3D print batteries, and their technology doesn't involve substrate or liquid. It's a solid, it's a 3D printed solid battery system, and I don't know what it's made out of yet, but that's what they say, and they say because the liquid, it's not liquid, the risks of fire are actually zero. So I'll be looking into it.
And I'm also part of the California Solar Canal Initiative, and we just started up our first solar covered canal in Turlock, California, which is cool. And that has an iron flow battery, and that iron flow battery is not flammable.
One of the things.
So there are out there. They're just, you know, we're dealing with the, you know, capitalism brings out the cheapest stuff first.
And again, commercially viable is the thing, like, you know, yeah.
And unfortunately with capitalism too, when your money starts moving in a research direction and that research direction doesn't look good and you have better ideas, you have to let them finish they have to finish that bad idea before they can start a new idea. And it's frustrating, you know? It's like gas to electric cars. How long do we have to wait?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't wait long enough because
Yeah, we didn't wait long enough.
the batteries were
We just needed better corporations to provide us electricity.
One of our colleagues, Ed Mitchell, who some of you may be familiar with, he did our last big presentation on the 24th of April, I think it was, regarding kind of what happened and how. And he's been gone all this month, but he's finishing up kind of a written version of that presentation, that PowerPoint he presented. That will go on the website as soon as he's done. He thinks he's going to be back in town in the next week, and he thinks he's going to be ready to have it finished up pretty quick. It's a deep dive on a lot of the things a lot of the questions that we've had in this community. But in there are also some recommendations, which is what we're really trying to, at this point, to do. Pretty much straightforward stuff. Question, why aren't there drones required on site to go up in the air if anything pops, right? So we have real-time monitoring what's in the air. Seems pretty straightforward, right? How about independent third-party testing of the charge and discharge rates on those batteries? It's possessed by the company, and if they abuse those charge and discharge rates, those batteries will fail sooner, and that could have been involved in what happened in January. We don't know. Part of the reason we don't know is because that is documents that are in the private possession of that company. That should be a third-party independent tracking, monitoring, testing company. Makes sense, right? We have fire engine departments, fire departments at every major airport in the country, and most of them never deploy for an actual accident, thank goodness. Why don't we require that these large facilities have those types of resources maintained by the company? So there are things that we're starting to work on. And one of them, which is where I got on this, is third generation batteries. Part of the argument we're making to authorities when we speak to them now is you need to stop until the batteries are safe. If they're gonna burn, you need to stop. If any of you saw the interview last week, at the very end, they quoted me as saying, stop, listen, learn.
Yeah.
And they're not listening to our community, but we're learning, right? So those batteries are flawed, the technology is being developed, and if we can just slow down a little bit, we might be able to get to a safer place rather than continuing to cram these things into boxes that can burn.
And I think we also need to make it clear that the state fire codes are changing this year, and they will be updating the BES regulations. We've got to lobby the state fire marshal for the things that you've just said. It's very important. There'll be a symposium in July about BES regulations in the state fire code coming up, so we've got to be very active in lobbying our state fire marshal.
Let's talk about our county. Tanya, Matt, I, a couple of the others have been going to these supervisor meetings. 5, 6, 7 of us, if we're lucky, maybe 10. We need you there too. So look, we'll send an email. We send out emails. If you get my emails or Tanya's emails, it's in there. It says, this is happening in a couple of days. Last Thursday, PG&E was in the room for the first time.
Yeah. And
Right?
KSVW was there
And
too.
yes, and I'm sorry, I've been offline with my computer because we're moving, but we tried to, Tanya pushed that out, but we need as many warm bodies as possible. I met with Supervisor Askew. She's a brilliant, lovely lady, but she's all in for these, I'm not going to curse, for this. And she's in the school that says, we're going to break some eggs because we have to go green. We got to get to 2045, which is complete decarbonization. So here it is, right across from her town, Marina. She's a conscientious, good person who cares about her community and about disadvantaged communities. But she's all in on this. About the time 10 or 15 people say, I want to come sit down with you and talk to you, maybe that would shift her perspective. But it takes warm bodies, guys. And it starts locally. And the big vote last month, whether or not to support both SB 33 and AB 303, I think it was.
Yes.
We had Glenn fighting for both as a matter of sending a message to Sacramento where these bills will be decided. And we had Tina, whatever her name is, in Carmel, who said, because we're Monterey, I'm going to support this idea. The other 3 said no.
Oh, no.
And that's a majority. Okay, so just a couple of details where you could get involved and maybe help us make a difference.
Was that the final decision?
The final decision was to support SB 33, which is Laird's bill,
Okay.
which really doesn't address our community at all. And then to not endorse Dawn Addis's bill, which is not going to pass, but that doesn't matter. The fact is Monterey is the impact zone. The world is actually watching, and as the impact zone, the idea that the county will do anything it can to show support for any legislation, that did not get the support it needed. They decided to write a letter asking for more information. Okay, yes, I'm sorry.
We also need to support Assembly Member Carl DeMaio's Bill 434 that would impose a 2-year moratorium on new construction of BES and ties it to the updates of the state fire codes. That's AB 434 by San Diego Assembly Member Carl DeMaio.
They had a big fire down there just about the time we had our fire. It was a big one.
I went to the supervisors meeting and I was really discouraged. Like, I'm loving this whole group right here, that they weren't there, but it's Tuesday at 1:30. People
Tough.
work, you
It's
know.
tough.
I have a more flexible job, so I can go. But I found it interesting that Vistra, PG&E, all their communication is with Chief Mendoza, but he's not relating anything to the county and letting the community know what's up.
Yeah. Vistra has its own PR firm that represents bad actors. their CEO, former CEO, went to jail for representing bad actors in a bad way. That's what they do. They have they also have an environmental monitoring firm, CTEH, which is the source of a lot of the information the county is relying upon and the state. So when they say nothing to see here, they're also saying we have independent testing by CTEH. They're also a bad actor. And Vistra is the largest utility polluter in the United States. That's who we're dealing with.
And they're not even from California.
Texas.
Yep.
And CTEH
Yes.
was also in East Palestine and lied about that.
Well, CTEH is at every big disaster, environmental disaster there is, and it just continues. They say exactly the same thing each time.
The playbook. Nina, you had something?
They're hired guns. That's what they're hired to do.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, we don't know yet the future of Don Addis's AB 303, and I just wanna put a plug in for not giving up on that bill. Sometimes bills become 2-year bills. I mean, if we keep repeating, it's gonna fail, it's too idealistic, it's gonna fail, we're giving that momentum.
Yes.
So just, I mean, there are other things that can happen in committees and at the legislature, and we need to still write letters and keep pushing for it.
Thank you, Nina. Correct, absolutely, I agree with you, and I'm sorry I characterized it the way I did.
Everybody.
So look, we're pretty much winding up now. I want to thank everybody who took time out of your day to be here today. I hope you'll tell your friends. I hope you go to the website. If you haven't already, I hope you'll send us your emails so we can let you know what's going on. We don't share it with anybody other than sometimes the professionals trying to reach out to folks. The Cavalry is here trying to help us. They're out there trying to help us. I'd like to, if I can, just get one very brief closing thought from each one of you, starting with you, Liv. Matt is going to lead a group. If you want to do it, there's a wonderful tour that he's set up out in the slough after this, okay? It'll be over the visitor center. So let's go through. Liv, starting with you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all for being here. I really appreciate seeing all of your lovely faces. You've been working hard. I will say, if you want more information or just a deep dive into these things in a more reputable way, go on Google Scholar. Get interested in be hyper specific in what you want to research. That's probably the most accurate information you'll find.
Liv, thank you for being here. Tyler, what do you got for us?
Yeah, I trust your gut. These agencies responsible for cleaning this site up, they're still figuring out how to properly remediate shoreline contaminated sites. So, you know, like we all are, don't trust their word at surface value. We know that there's a big risk here. Hold them accountable. They have a really big job to do, and we're going to see them through. Do it.
Thank you for being here, Skylar. Thank you so much. What do you got for us?
For those of you who are dealing with soil contamination in your yards, like you mentioned, organic matter is your friend. Mulch, straw, weeds that you pile on, just add organic, you know, once you've rinsed it off, once you've vacuumed, whatever you've done as much as you can to deal with the immediate concerns. If you're dealing with the residual contamination, just adding that organic matter can make a huge difference and go a long way for mitigating those dioxins and for dealing with some of those contaminants. And if anybody's interested in more like a soil remediation approach, I'm happy to talk to you more.
Thank you, Mike. What do you got for us?
You know, we're all on the same page here. We all want change. You know, they told us that it was going to be safe. You know, back when they originally approved this project, they knew it wasn't safe. You know, right? Because these things can burn. It was safe as long as it's not burning. You know, but what I've seen here is what do we need to do to make a change? And to effect a change, we need to change the regulations. We need to change the laws. And so that's where we need to focus much of our attention, so that it never happens again. You know, we need to bring to the attention, hey, we need to have a say in our community about what's going in our community. It's absolutely essential that the firefighters who are local, there's a system to contain a reasonably expected as well as a disastrous type of an event, like what happened here. And just to back off and let it burn is not a mitigation. But that is just a response. So really what I get back to is, to affect a change, we gather information. We've got a lot of knowledge here and a great pool of resources. And now I think it's time to focus on the legislative aspect and to really force that hand and hold our politicians accountable to affect this change so that it truly never happens again here.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Thanks for your work. A lot of work. Thank you. Dustin.
Well, I just want to acknowledge that this has been a challenging time for everybody in this community, and as a frontline community dealing with a new technology, just wanted to say I'm sorry that you're all and we are all experiencing this, and I think we have a lot of opportunity to make it better. To the extent I could be a resource for folks, I would love to help do that, to interact with the policy, to help shape regulations and inform a way to make sure that this never happens again. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Dustin. All right, so we've been here because of the very kind Solano family. Kim has made this possible for us. We're taking care of the chips and salsa. If you want to make a small donation for Kim, she didn't ask for this, but she's a local business person who was closed down for about 2.5 months. So if you do, you can just leave, you can give me something and leave something, I'll make sure she gets it. She's a wonderful person. You might see her on the way out. You don't have to, it's totally your choice, but if you want to, it'll be our way of saying thank you for the space. Thank you, everybody.